Hoy nos sumergimos en un documento que plantea una pregunta incómoda. ¿Creen que la próxima guerra mundial comenzará en la Tierra o en la órbita? Bienvenidos a un nuevo Deep Dive de Strategic Labs. Recuerden que tienen los links originales en la descripción.
Yeah, and to transition into what we are unpacking today, I want you, the listener, to kind of forget the dry academic table of contents you might expect.
Right, because today we are looking at a stack of intelligence assessments, military strategy documents, and, geopolitical white papers.
Exactly. Stuff from places like RAND, the Secure World Foundation, NASA, the U.S. Space Force, and books like Astropolitik and The Kill Chain.
And what's really wild is that they all point to one single, frankly terrifying conclusion about the fragility of our modern world.
They do. We are looking at a complete redefinition of where the most critical vulnerabilities of human civilization actually lie.
It is a profound shift. And honestly, it requires a complete rewiring of how we perceive the space immediately above our planet.
Well, yeah, because for decades, since the middle of the 20th century, humanity has collectively viewed space through a very specific, almost romanticized lens.
Yeah, the scientific sanctuary.
Right. We looked up and saw an arena for technological prestige, the domain of astronauts, the Apollo missions, the noble pursuit of pushing the boundaries of human knowledge.
But if you read between the lines of the strategic analysis we are reviewing today, that era is definitively over. The era of space as a purely scientific, peaceful commons,
Okay, let's unpack this, because when we say space here, we aren't talking about deep space.
No.
We aren't talking about Mars or the moon. We are talking about a very specific sliver of real estate.
Exactly. We are specifically looking at the band of space, roughly 500 kilometers above the planet.
Which is known as low Earth orbit, or LEO.
Right. And that specific environment has fundamentally transformed. It's no longer just a vacuum for scientific inquiry.
No, it is the strategic nervous system of modern civilization.
Wow.
It's military infrastructure. It is the backbone of global finance. It's the ultimate intelligence network.
And as our sources starkly outline, it's potentially the first and most critical battlefield of the next great power conflict.
The strategic nervous system of modern civilization. I mean, that is an evocative phrase, and it's exactly why we are doing this deep dive.
Yeah, because when you, the person listening right now, think about geopolitical flashpoints, your mind immediately goes to the maps you see on the news.
Right. You think about armored columns in Eastern Europe.
Or naval standoffs in the South China Sea, or tensions across the Taiwan Strait.
But the thesis we are exploring today is that the most vital, the most contested, and arguably the most fragile battlefield is actually floating silently above your head right now.
Which is crazy to think about.
Mm-hmm.
It is completely invisible to the naked eye, yet it dictates almost every aspect of your daily life.
So to really grasp the gravity of this, we have to look at the foundational principles of military strategy.
Right, going back into history.
Exactly. Historically, military advantage has almost always been defined by a race for altitude.
The high ground.
Yeah, the concept of the ultimate high ground isn't a new invention of the Space Force. It is merely being applied to a new domain.
Right. If you trace the evolution of warfare through human history, it is basically a relentless pursuit of elevation.
You take the hill, you control the battlefield. It's a military strategy 101.
Precisely. Thousands of years ago, tactical advantage meant holding the physical high ground on a battlefield.
Right, controlling the hills and the mountains so your archers had better range.
Then it evolved. It meant building fortresses with high walls to see the enemy coming from miles away.
And to leverage gravity for your projectiles.
But fast forward to the 20th century, and the definition of the high ground changed dramatically with the invention of powered flight.
Right, the high ground was no longer a hill, it was the sky.
Exactly. The First and Second World Wars demonstrated that whoever controlled the airspace, whoever possessed air superiority, ultimately controlled the destiny of the ground forces below.
Okay, hold on. I want to jump in with an analogy here to kind of ground this concept for you.
Go for it.
Think of early warfare, like the hills and fortresses, like playing chess on a flat, two-dimensional board.
Okay.
You are moving pieces around, trying to outflank your opponent on the same plane. Then airplanes come along, and it's like adding a layer of glass hovering a few inches above the chessboard.
I see.
You can move pieces on the glass to look down and influence the board below. But now, with low Earth orbit, we are talking about a completely different game.
How so? What's the difference?
Space is like this massive, enveloping, three-dimensional board. And the terrifying part is that the pieces hovering way up high on that 3D board now dictate whether the pieces on the ground can even move.
Or communicate, or even see each other at all.
Exactly. The ground game is entirely subjugated to the orbital game. If you don't control the orbit, you don't even get to play the ground game.
That is an incredibly apt way to frame it. The ground forces are fundamentally tethered to the orbital assets.
Whoever controls low Earth orbit today effectively controls the flow of critical information globally.
The strategic vantage point has moved from 30,000 feet in the air to 500 kilometers into the vacuum of space.
And the key difference between the aircraft era and the orbital era is the sheer, uncompromising scale of our dependency on it.
Which brings us to what the documents refer to as the invisible dependency.
Yes.
And I think we need to connect this directly to you, the everyday listener, because the sheer scale of our reliance on this invisible infrastructure is staggering.
The documents stress that modern civilization has essentially built a trap for itself.
Right. Without satellites, the modern world doesn't just slow down, it actively fragments.
It is a systemic fragility that is rarely acknowledged outside of highly classified strategic circles.
Let's break down the cascading failures that would occur if that orbital layer were suddenly neutralized.
Okay, the most obvious one, the one everyone knows, is navigation.
The Global Positioning System, or GPS, goes blind.
Right, and people often think of GPS just as the blue dot on their phone's map app that tells them to turn left at the next light.
But it's so much more than that.
Exactly. It is deeply integrated into the entire global logistics apparatus.
Global aviation networks,
Yeah.
which rely on satellite navigation for routing and spacing aircraft safely, would destabilize immediately.
Maritime logistics, too. The massive container ships that keep the global economy moving, bringing everything from electronics to food across the oceans.
They would lose their primary means of efficient oceanic navigation.
But the civilian impact gets much, much worse when you look at the financial sector.
I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah.
Because as we read through these Rand and CSIS reports, the detail that truly blew my mind, the one that really keeps you awake at night, is the connection to the global financial system.
Yeah, it's why.
When people think of space warfare, they think of military radios going down. They do not realize that the banking system literally breaks down.
No, they don't.
Explain how that works, because on the surface, banks and space don't seem connected at all.
What's fascinating here is the precise physical mechanism of that failure. It comes down to timing.
Timing.
Yeah. We call it GPS, which stands for Global Positioning System, but a better name might be the Global Timing System.
Oh, interesting.
GPS satellites are, at their core, highly precise atomic clocks orbiting the Earth. They continuously broadcast not just their position, but the exact microscopic fraction of a second.
Okay, so they are just giant clocks in space. But why does Wall Street care what time a satellite thinks it is?
Because the global financial system relies entirely on that timing synchronization to timestamp transactions. Consider the SWIFT network.
Okay, let's do a quick explainer on SWIFT for a second, just to make sure everyone is on the same page.
Yeah.
Explain it like I'm 5.
Sure. SWIFT is basically the messaging system that banks use to securely send your money across the world.
Okay.
If you wire money from a bank in New York to a bank in London, SWIFT is the digital courier that verifies the instruction.
Right, got it.
Now, add in millions of high-frequency trading algorithms executing complex stock market transactions every microsecond, plus every ATM withdrawal, plus every credit card swipe at a coffee shop.
That's a lot of data.
Exactly. In order to prevent fraud, ensure the correct sequence of global trades, and maintain the integrity of that SWIFT network, every single one of those transactions must be perfectly time-stamped.
So the computers need to agree on exactly when something happened, down to the millisecond.
Exactly. If server A in New York thinks a trade happened slightly before server B in London, the logic of the global market unravels.
And how do all these disparate servers across the globe synchronize their internal clocks so perfectly?
They listen to the atomic clocks on the GPS satellites.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. If you disrupt or jam the timing signal from satellites, the banking networks cannot verify when a transaction occurred relative to another.
So the entire financial architecture just loses its synchronization.
Right. Banks would have to halt transactions entirely to prevent massive systemic errors and cascading financial collapse.
So just picture this for a second. Ask yourself to imagine your normal morning routine tomorrow.
Yeah, let's walk through it.
You wake up, and your phone alarm goes off. That time is synced via satellite. You check the weather, which relies on meteorological satellites.
You go to buy a coffee and tap your card?
Right. The verification of that transaction relies on the GPS timing signal. You get in your car to navigate to work. The routing requires satellite triangulation.
Before you have even sat down at your desk, every single action you have taken is tethered by an invisible string to a machine flying at 17,000 miles per hour in a freezing vacuum hundreds of miles above your head.
We don't see it, so we don't think about it. But we have built an entire civilization with an invisible dependency on this orbital nervous system.
And that dependency is exactly what transforms low Earth orbit from a scientific frontier into the ultimate strategic vulnerability.
When a civilization's civilian and economic stability is entirely reliant on an exposed technological layer, that layer becomes the primary target in any major geopolitical confrontation.
Because if everyday civilian life is entirely dependent on this orbital nervous system, modern military operations are even more critically entangled with it.
Which is the perfect pivot.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the military mechanics. Because if civilians are reliant on space, modern militaries are absolutely addicted to it.
Oh, addicted is the right word.
Our sources, particularly the analysis drawn from Christian Brose's concepts in the kill chain, detail how the nature of war has fundamentally shifted.
It is no longer about massing thousands of troops on a border and charging forward with bayonets.
Right. It is about precision, speed, and absolute information superiority.
Yes. Modern precision warfare is entirely predicated on a concept known as the continuous orbital kill chain.
The kill chain.
Yeah. This is the sequence of events that must happen flawlessly for a modern military to locate, identify, and destroy a target.
In the past, say during World War II, this chain could take days or weeks.
It relied on human scouts with binoculars, physical photographs developed in dark rooms, and manual mathematical calculations to aim artillery.
But today, it operates in a matter of minutes or even seconds, and almost every single step is routed through space.
Let's walk through this step by step to really visualize how this works in real time on a modern battlefield.
Give me a hypothetical scenario.
Okay, imagine a scenario where a military needs to neutralize a highly mobile, long-range missile launcher hidden in a mountainous region.
Okay, got the picture.
The first step of the kill chain is detection. A surveillance satellite in low Earth orbit, equipped with advanced sensors, detects the target moving on the ground.
Let me stop you there because the jargon can get thick in these documents. They mention synthetic aperture radar or SAR satellites.
Yes.
Explain how that differs from just, taking a really good digital picture from space.
That's a crucial distinction. Optical cameras taking a regular digital picture, they need light.
Right.
If the missile launcher is moving at night, or if there is heavy cloud cover, an optical satellite is completely blind.
Makes sense.
Synthetic aperture radar, or SAR, works differently. Instead of capturing ambient light, the satellite actively shoots pulses of radio waves down to the Earth.
Oh, yeah.
Those radio waves pass right through clouds and darkness, hit the ground, and bounce back onto the satellite.
So it's actively pinging the ground.
Exactly. By measuring how the waves bounce back, the satellite's computers can paint a highly detailed 3D topographic map of the surface below.
It essentially allows the military to see through the weather, day or night.
Like a camera with a flash that can see right through a thunderstorm.
Okay, so step one. The SAR satellite detects the missile launcher. What happens next?
Step 2. That satellite instantly transmits the encrypted data, the precise coordinates, and the radar signature up to a relay satellite stationed higher in orbit,
Okay.
which then bounces the information down to a command center that might be halfway across the world.
Wow, and step 3.
Step 3. The command center processes this data, confirms the target, and transmits firing instructions back up through the satellite network, and then down to an unmanned aerial drone or a cruise missile stationed hundreds of miles away from the target.
And then step 4 is the boom.
Right. Step 4. The weapon system relies on GPS satellite signals to navigate precisely to those coordinates and executes the strike.
That entire loop detect, transmit, assign, execute is the continuous orbital kill chain.
And it is terrifyingly efficient when it works.
But the vulnerability is glaring, isn't it? What happens if you simply snap one link in that chain?
If you snap the orbital link, you induce what strategists call blind warfare.
Blind warfare.
Yeah. This is one of the most sobering concepts detailed in these military assessments. Without the orbital layer, the entire architecture of modern combat collapses instantly.
Give me a tangible example. What actually happens to the multi-million-dollar hardware on the ground?
Well, those advanced surveillance drones, which cost tens of millions of dollars each, lose their ability to navigate or transmit real-time video feeds over the horizon.
They essentially become blind, remote-controlled airplanes with extremely limited range.
Exactly. Precision-guided missiles designed to fly through a specific window in a specific building lose their pinpoint accuracy,
They revert to essentially being unguided, dumb rockets.
which dramatically increases the risk of civilian casualties and completely misses the strategic target.
So it's essentially like having the most expensive advanced smartphone in the world, but you are in a dead zone with no cell towers and no Wi-Fi.
It just becomes a very expensive glass brick.
The military hardware on the ground is phenomenal, but without the space-based network telling it where to go and what to look at, it is practically useless.
Precisely. And it's not just the weapons, it's the entire command structure.
Right. Modern militaries rely heavily on battlefield awareness, the ability of a commander sitting in a bunker to look at a digital map screen showing the exact location of all friendly and enemy forces in real time.
And that map is painted using satellite data.
If you take away the satellites, the screens go dark. The command structures fragment. Units in the field become isolated.
The fog of war, which modern technology has spent decades trying to lift, rolls back in thicker than ever.
You are essentially forcing an army optimized for 21st century precision warfare to suddenly fight a mid-20th century war.
Relying on line-of-sight radios, compasses, and paper maps.
And the implications of that regression are massive, not just for the soldiers on the ground, but for the entire geopolitical balance of power.
But the documents we are reviewing make an incredible connection here. They point out that this dominance in the orbital kill chain doesn't exist in a vacuum, pun fully intended.
Oh, absolutely. It connects right back down to Earth.
Specifically to the industrial and technological supply chains. We're talking about silicon. If we connect this to the bigger picture, the analysis highlights a crucial physical overlap. Space power isn't just about rocket fuel and thrusters.
No, it's fundamentally about microelectronics.
The orbital battlefield is inextricably linked to technological industrial sovereignty, specifically the global supply chains of semiconductors, specialized electronics, and the industrial capacity to build and launch advanced systems.
So I'm going to play devil's advocate for a second.
Okay.
If a satellite gets destroyed, can't a superpower like the US or China just build another one and launch it? Like, we have the blueprints, right?
You can have the blueprints, sure, but you need the physical chips to build the brain of the satellite.
Ah.
A modern military satellite requires highly specialized, radiation-hardened semiconductors to survive the harsh environment of space.
And the supply chain for those chips is incredibly fragile.
The design might happen in the US, but the actual manufacturing of the most advanced chips happens almost exclusively in foundries in Taiwan.
Operated by TSMC.
Yes, using incredibly complex lithography machines built by a single company, ASML, in the Netherlands.
So the bottleneck isn't the rocket. The bottleneck is the tiny piece of silicon inside the satellite.
Exactly. You cannot maintain a continuous orbital kill chain or rapidly replace satellites if they are destroyed in a conflict, if you do not control or have secure access to those advanced computer chips.
The nations that control the semiconductor foundries, the complex supply routes, the raw materials, they're the ones who ultimately dictate who can hold the high ground in space.
It is a stark reminder that the war in orbit is entirely sustained by the factories on the ground.
Which brings us to a really dark logical conclusion.
Yeah.
If LEO is so crucial to both civilian infrastructure and this intricate military kill chain, the logical immediate instinct for any general in a major conflict would be to neutralize the enemy's satellites.
Right.
If your adversary's entire military apparatus relies on a few dozen nodes in orbit, destroying those nodes guarantees victory. You blind the enemy. You cut their communications. You win.
Right. That is the initial, almost reflexive instinct of terrestrial military strategy. You find the enemy's center of gravity and you hit it with kinetic force. You blow it up.
But this is exactly where traditional military strategy hits a massive catastrophic wall of physics.
Because doing so unleashes one of the most terrifying apocalyptic concepts in space strategy, the Kessler syndrome, and the reality of mutually assured destruction in orbit.
Okay, so I've seen the movie Gravity, so I have a Hollywood idea of what this means, but let's break down the actual science. What is the Kessler syndrome?
Well, the Kessler syndrome is named after NASA scientist Donald Kessler, who proposed the mathematical model for it back in 1978.
Oh, so we've known about this for a long time.
We have. It is the absolute nightmare scenario of orbital mechanics. To understand it, you have to understand the fundamental physics of low Earth orbit.
Okay, lay it on me.
Objects in LEO are not just floating stationary defying gravity, they are actually falling constantly toward the Earth, but they are moving forward so incredibly fast that they keep missing the ground.
And that speed is roughly 17,500 miles per hour.
Or about 5 miles per second.
5 miles a second.
Yep.
That is, at that speed, the physics of an impact become almost incomprehensible. Let's use an analogy. What does a collision at that speed actually look like?
Think of it this way. Imagine a busy multi-lane highway, but every single car is driving 17,000 miles an hour.
That's a fast highway.
Very fast. If two cars crash, they don't just crumple and stop on the shoulder. The sheer kinetic energy causes them to instantly shatter into a million razor blades.
Wow.
And those razor blades keep traveling down the highway at the exact same speed, shredding every other car they touch.
So a fleck of paint, literally a chip of paint the size of a fingernail, traveling at orbital velocities, has the kinetic energy of a bowling ball moving at highway speeds.
It can punch clean through the armored hull of a spacecraft.
And so, if we apply that physics to a kinetic anti-satellite strike, let's say Nation A launches a missile from Earth specifically designed to physically ram and destroy Nation B's communications satellite. What happens?
The missile hits the satellite, but the satellite doesn't just quietly break into a few large, easily trackable pieces.
Right.
The immense kinetic energy of the impact shatters it into thousands, perhaps tens of thousands, of fragments of shrapnel. We actually saw this in reality in 2007.
Right, the Chinese ASAT test. This isn't just theoretical.
Exactly. In 2007, China intentionally destroyed one of their own defunct weather satellites, the Fengjun 1C, using a ground-launched kinetic kill vehicle.
And the impact created the largest single space debris incident in history.
It generated over 3,000 pieces of trackable debris pieces larger than a softball, and an estimated 150,000 pieces of smaller, untrackable shrapnel.
And all that shrapnel continues to orbit the Earth today at those terrifying speeds.
And here's where the syndrome part begins,
Right.
right? Because orbital space is a shared environment.
Yes, you now have a dense cloud of high-speed projectiles crisscrossing the orbital lanes.
The idea behind the Kessler syndrome is simple but devastating. Those fragments will eventually collide with other functioning satellites.
And each new collision destroys another satellite, which in turn generates thousands of new fragments.
Those new fragments hit more satellites, creating more debris. It becomes a runaway chain reaction.
A cascading series of collisions that grows exponentially. More debris creates more collisions. More collisions create more debris.
So, what does this all mean for us?
Well, the documents are very clear on the timeline and the scale of this disaster. It's not just about an adversary losing a few military satellites during a short conflict.
It's about the fact that the cascade doesn't discriminate.
A tiny piece of shrapnel from a destroyed Chinese spy satellite will happily punch a hole through an American GPS satellite, a European weather satellite, or the International Space Station. It whiffs through everything.
The long-term strategic consequence outlined in these reports is staggering. If the Kessler syndrome reaches a critical mass, the result is a semi-permanent orbital dead zone.
EL becomes so saturated with hypervelocity shrapnel that it becomes practically impossible to operate any satellite in that region.
Or even to launch a spacecraft safely through it to reach higher orbits or deep space. Any new satellite you launch would be shredded within weeks or months.
We would essentially be locking ourselves inside our own planet.
The reports describe it as triggering a severe technological regression.
We talked earlier about how civilian life relies on the invisible nervous system of satellites for banking, logistics, and communication.
The Kessler syndrome means permanently severing that nervous system. The financial markets crash, global logistics stall, internet connectivity in remote areas vanishes.
And the worst part is, we have no way to go up there and fix it because the environment itself is lethal to our technology.
We would trap humanity below orbital space for decades, maybe even centuries, until the debris orbits slowly decay due to atmospheric drag and burn up.
This creates a profound and complex strategic dynamic, which military planners are grappling with intensely right now.
It draws a direct striking parallel to Cold War nuclear deterrence.
During the Cold War, the doctrine of mutually assured destruction, or MAD, maintained a very tense peace between the U.S. and the Soviets.
The logic was that if you launch your nuclear weapons at the enemy, they will launch theirs at you, and both nations will be completely annihilated.
Therefore, no rational actor will initiate a nuclear strike. The only winning move is not to play the game.
Precisely. Today, space warfare increasingly operates under a new form of this doctrine, an orbital MAD doctrine.
Because the orbital battlefield is a shared, hyper-interconnected environment, a massive kinetic attack in space is essentially suicidal.
If Nation A blows up Nation B's satellites to blind their military, the resulting Kessler cascade will inevitably destroy Nation A's own satellites within months.
No major power can survive the destruction of these systems.
Therefore, destroying orbital infrastructure with explosives risks mutual technological collapse.
It's a fascinating paradox. The military has spent billions building this ultimate godlike capability to fight wars with precision from space, but using the most direct method to defeat an enemy in that domain, blowing up their assets, guarantees the destruction of your own civilization's technological foundation.
So, the kinetic option, sending a missile to smash a satellite to pieces, is effectively off the table for any rational geopolitical actor.
Which leads us directly to the current state of affairs.
Yes.
If blowing up a satellite guarantees you destroy your own infrastructure in a debris storm, how on earth do militaries actually neutralize enemy satellites today?
Because make no mistake, as our sources from the RAND Corporation and the U.S. Space Force clearly document, the competition is fierce and ongoing.
I can't use a missile, so what's left?
And this brings us into the realm of the shadow war.
I want to stress to you listening, this isn't a speculative, distant future scenario from a science fiction novel. This shadow war is happening in orbit above us right now.
The strategic assessments from the think tanks are very clear. We are seeing major powers, and we are maintaining strict neutrality here, just reporting what the institutional sources document, including Russia, China, and the United States, actively operating what are called inspector satellites and highly maneuverable orbital systems.
What exactly are these?
These systems represent a dramatic shift in orbital behavior. Historically, a satellite was launched into a specific, predictable orbit, and it generally stayed there until its fuel ran out. It was a fixed node.
But these new maneuverable systems have advanced propulsion and navigation capabilities.
They can intentionally alter their orbits, approach other satellites closely, and conduct operations. Officially, a nation might launch one and label it as a space debris monitoring system or an experimental maintenance craft.
But the military implications are obvious.
Wait, let me stop you there. If a satellite is moving at 17,500 miles per hour, how is it even physically possible for another inspector satellite to sneak up on it?
Yeah, doesn't the whole world have ground radar watching this stuff? You can't just hide in space.
You're right that you can't hide in space. The U.S. Space Surveillance Network tracks tens of thousands of objects, but you don't need to be invisible to be threatening.
Okay, so how do they sneak up?
The process of sneaking up in space is about orbital mechanics, specifically altering your velocity, known as delta V, to match the orbit of your target over days or weeks.
You perform a series of burns to gradually catch up to the target satellite until you are flying in formation with it, perhaps just a few miles or even a few hundred feet away.
So they just pull up alongside the enemy satellite and stare at it.
Essentially, yes.
Yeah.
A great example documented in the open source intelligence community involved a Russian satellite known as Cosmos 2542.
In 2020, it synchronized its orbit to closely shadow a multi-billion-dollar U.S. spy satellite called USA 245.
It was close enough to observe what the U.S. satellite was looking at, map its physical vulnerabilities, and potentially intercept its communication links.
It's like a high-stakes game of cat and mouse in the dark at 17,000 miles per hour. And the arsenal they're developing for this shadow war is entirely focused on non-kinetic warfare.
Because, again, if you can't blow the satellite up and create debris, you have to find ways to disable it without breaking it into pieces. So what does a non-kinetic weapon look like?
The non-kinetic arsenal is diverse and highly sophisticated. It includes powerful ground-based or orbital electronic warfare systems designed to jam communications links.
Explain how jamming works, because people hear the word and think of a radio making a buzzing sound. But what's the actual physics of jamming a satellite?
Jamming is essentially shouting so loudly that the satellite can't hear the whisper of the legitimate signal it's supposed to receive.
Ah, I get it.
Because a satellite is 500 kilometers away, its signal is incredibly faint by the time it reaches Earth and vice versa.
So a ground jammer just needs to point a giant radio antenna at the receiver and blast white noise at the exact same frequency the satellite uses.
The receiver gets overwhelmed by the raw power of the jammer and drops the connection. It severs the link between the satellite and the ground station.
Okay, so you can deafen the satellite. What else?
You can also blind it. This involves using directed energy weapons, specifically high-powered lasers.
If an adversary knows an optical spy satellite is passing overhead, They can fire a ground-based laser directly at the satellite's lens.
Just to clarify, we aren't talking about a Death Star laser blowing it up.
No, no. Imagine shining a massively powerful laser pointer directly into the delicate CCD sensor of a multi-billion-dollar DSLR camera lens.
It overloads the sensor, it can dazzle the satellite, which temporarily blinds it while it passes over a sensitive area.
Or, if the laser is powerful enough, it can permanently burn out the sensor, rendering the satellite completely blind and useless forever, without creating a single piece of space debris.
That's jamming and dazzling. But the documents also mention spoofing. How is that different?
If jamming is shouting to drown out a signal, spoofing is whispering false directions.
Instead of blocking the GPS signal, a spoofer transmits a fake GPS signal that is slightly stronger than the real one.
An enemy drone or a ship's navigation system locks onto the fake signal, and suddenly, the system believes it is somewhere it isn't.
You could spoof an enemy drone into flying directly into the side of a mountain, or spoof a ship's navigation system so it wanders into hostile waters.
And then there's the most sci-fi element of all this, which actually exists, the robotic arms.
Oh yeah, the robotic arms.
So we essentially have multi-billion-dollar robotic space ninjas whose entire job is to sneak up and unplug the enemy's router.
It sounds absurd, but it is a genuine strategic concern. Several nations are developing orbital platforms equipped with highly articulate robotic arms, ostensibly for removing space debris or repairing satellites.
But a robotic arm that can repair a satellite can also sabotage one.
It could theoretically approach an adversary's satellite, grapple it, and physically manipulate it, perhaps clipping a critical power cable.
Or nudging its communication antenna a few degrees out of alignment.
Or simply pushing it slightly out of its required orbit so it burns up in the atmosphere.
The satellite remains in one piece, so there is no Kessler-style debris cloud, but it is effectively neutralized.
The war in orbit is designed to begin invisibly. But this raises an incredible problem for the people trying to manage this on the ground.
Because if these weapons don't blow things up, how do you know you are actually under attack in the vacuum of space?
This raises an important question, and it is exactly what military strategists are losing sleep over. In the documents, they call this strategic ambiguity, and it is a terrifying geopolitical concept.
Let's run a hypothetical scenario. Let's say a critical early warning satellite one that is specifically designed to detect the heat balloon of an intercontinental ballistic nuclear missile launch suddenly goes completely dark.
It stops transmitting. The screens in the command center go black.
Okay, so the command center's staring at a black screen. They are instantly in crisis mode.
In that moment, the political and military leadership faces a nearly impossible diagnostic challenge.
Space is a profoundly hostile environment. It is subject to extreme temperature fluctuations, intense solar radiation, and the constant threat of naturally occurring micrometeoroids.
Satellites are complex, delicate machines. They experience technical malfunctions, software crashes, and computer glitches all the time.
So the people in the bunker have to figure out, was this just a random technical malfunction? Did a tiny piece of space rock happen to hit the solar panel?
Or was this a covert, non-kinetic attack by a rival nation?
Did an enemy just use a localized cyber attack or a focused ground-based jamming signal to blind our early warning system because they're preparing to launch a first strike on Earth?
That ambiguity is incredibly dangerous. In the terrestrial domain, if an enemy tank crosses your border or a missile strikes your airfield, the intent and attribution are undeniable.
You know who attacked you, you know how they did it, and you know it was an act of war.
But in space, it is incredibly difficult to determine intent, attribute blame, or establish clear escalation thresholds. The vacuum of space provides perfect cover for covert sabotage.
And the geopolitical risk here is astronomical. If a nation incorrectly assumes a random technical glitch was actually an act of war, they might retaliate aggressively,
triggering a spiral of escalation that could rapidly lead to full-scale, devastating conflict on Earth based on a false premise.
Conversely, if a nation is too cautious and assumes an actual non-kinetic cyber attack was just a software malfunction, they might leave themselves completely vulnerable to a catastrophic follow-on strike.
Strategic ambiguity turns the orbital environment into a massive powder keg of potential miscalculation.
It forces military and political leaders to make civilization-altering decisions with incomplete, deeply ambiguous information.
And just as governments are struggling to navigate this incredible, complex, and dangerous shadow war, a massive paradigm shift is happening right under their noses regarding who actually owns and operates the infrastructure they are fighting over.
Here's where it gets really interesting.
Because for the entirety of the space age, up until very recently, there was a fundamental, unquestioned truth. Space was the exclusive domain of nation-states.
It was a state monopoly. Only massive superpower governments had the enormous financial resources, the vast industrial bases, and the political will to build rockets and launch infrastructure into orbit.
When we think of space history, we associate it with NASA, the Soviet space program, the ESA national flags painted on the sides of massive titanium rockets.
That era is completely over. The historical monopoly of the state has rapidly evaporated.
Today, private corporations, agile, extremely well-funded, and driven by commercial interests rather than purely geopolitical ones, are increasingly controlling the vital arteries of space.
We are seeing private entities dominate launch capabilities with reusable rockets that have dramatically lowered the cost of accessing orbit.
They operate vast networks of commercial imaging satellites that provide high-resolution intelligence data that was once the exclusive, highly classified domain of military spy agencies.
And, most significantly, they are deploying massive constellations of satellites to provide global orbital internet. This is an unprecedented geopolitical shift.
The case study that all the modern strategy documents point to, the moment that truly proved this paradigm shift from theoretical to undeniable reality, is the war in Ukraine. I want to spend some time on this because it is fascinating.
It is the defining case study of modern privatized space warfare. When the conflict began, traditional terrestrial communication infrastructure was heavily targeted and degraded.
But what is less known is what happened to the satellite networks. On the exact eve of the invasion, Russian cyber operators executed a massive, highly sophisticated hack against the KASAT network, which was operated by Viasat, a traditional commercial satellite provider.
Right, they essentially bricked the satellite terminals on the ground.
Exactly. They pushed a malicious firmware update that wiped the memory of tens of thousands of ground terminals across Europe and Ukraine.
The Ukrainian military was heavily reliant on that system for command and control. In the opening hours of the war, they were effectively deaf and blind.
In a conventional scenario, this would have severely crippled their ability to mount a coordinated defense. But then, an unprecedented variable entered the equation.
SpaceX activated its Starlink system over the region.
And suddenly, a private, commercially available satellite internet system, something designed to give high-speed internet to people in remote cabins, became the operational lifeline and the central communication backbone for an entire national military effort.
And what's crucial from a technical standpoint is why Starlink succeeded where traditional satellites failed.
Right. Why didn't they just get jammed too?
Traditional satellites are often singular, massive nodes in high orbits. Starlink is a proliferated constellation of thousands of small satellites in low Earth orbit. Furthermore, the Starlink ground terminals use advanced phased array antennas.
Break it down. Why does a phased array antenna matter when someone is trying to jam you?
A traditional satellite dish has to be physically pointed at a satellite. If a jammer broadcasts noise from a nearby hill, the dish picks it up.
A phased array antenna is flat. It doesn't move physically.
Instead, it uses software to digitally steer its signal, creating a highly focused, invisible beam directly to the satellite moving overhead.
If it detects a jamming signal coming from a specific direction on the ground, the software can instantly null that direction, essentially telling the antenna to ignore any radio waves coming from that specific angle and maintain the link to the satellite.
It proved incredibly resilient to Russian electronic warfare.
It is staggering when you think about the details.
Yeah.
We saw soldiers in muddy trenches using standard commercial Starlink terminals. Again, equipment you or I could order online to coordinate artillery fire, pilot surveillance drones, and maintain constant battlefield awareness.
The entire continuous orbital kill chain we discussed earlier was suddenly being routed entirely through the infrastructure of a private company.
This creates a deeply complex dynamic. A private company, effectively guided by its CEO and board of directors, suddenly gains strategic influence on a battlefield that is comparable to, and in some aspects perhaps even exceeded, the capabilities of state military communication assets.
They literally controlled the flow of operational data.
And that leads to a profound philosophical and strategic debate that is playing out right now in defense departments around the world. What does it mean for global security when a private CEO who is not elected by citizens and is not subject to traditional military chains of command controls battlefield communications more effectively than a sovereign government?
It threatens to erode state sovereignty in fundamental ways. Traditionally, the state holds a monopoly on the legitimate use of force and the infrastructure that supports it.
But if a private entity can decide, based on corporate policy, terms of service, or the personal views of its leadership, whether or not to allow a military to use its orbital network for an offensive operation, you have a massive disruption of traditional military hierarchies.
Right, because we saw reports of exactly this happening, where geofencing decisions made by the company dictated where drones could and couldn't operate.
Exactly. You are decentralizing the control of war itself. A sovereign state could meticulously plan a vital military operation, but essentially be vetoed by a corporate terms of service agreement or a technical geofencing decision made by a tech company halfway across the world.
It's a terrifying prospect for military planners. They are accustomed to absolute, unquestioned control over their operational assets.
Now, they are realizing that the future of global conflict may depend entirely on corporate infrastructure. They're renting the high ground rather than owning it.
And it adds an entirely new, deeply unpredictable variable to the already volatile mix of orbital warfare.
You have the threat of Kessler syndrome preventing kinetic strikes. You have the shadow war of non-kinetic jamming causing strategic ambiguity. And now you have the fact that the playing field itself is increasingly owned by private billionaires.
When you synthesize all these elements together, the fragility, the physics, the ambiguity, and the privatization, you arrive at a deeply concerning picture of where global power dynamics are heading.
Combining the catastrophic risks of debris, the ambiguity of invisible attacks, and the shifting ownership of space, it is abundantly clear that great power competition has fully migrated into orbit.
The documents from the CSIS and the Space Force outline the active military planning currently underway to address this. And I want to emphasize, this isn't speculative white paper thinking anymore.
No, there are massive, multi-billion-dollar budgets being allocated by the Pentagon and its adversaries right now. Major powers are in a full-blown race for space superiority.
So what does the future arsenal actually look like?
Well, the technological developments are accelerating rapidly. First, we are seeing a race for autonomous satellites.
Because the threat of jamming severing the link to ground control is so high, militaries are designing systems equipped with onboard artificial intelligence.
These satellites can independently detect threats, maneuver defensively to avoid a collision or an inspector satellite, and even initiate non-kinetic countermeasures, like firing back a dazzling laser without waiting for instructions from humans on Earth.
It effectively compresses the reaction time in a space conflict from minutes to milliseconds,
Taking the human completely out of the loop in space warfare. What else?
There is a massive push for resilient satellite constellations. Instead of relying on a few massive multi-billion-dollar satellites, which strategists refer to as juicy targets because they represent single points of failure, militaries are actively adopting the commercial model we saw with Starlink.
They are deploying hundreds or thousands of smaller, cheaper satellites.
If an adversary uses an expensive non-kinetic weapon to disable 10 of your satellites, the network as a whole survives and reroutes the data. This concept is called resilience through proliferation.
And obviously, the race to develop more efficient, rapid, and reusable launch systems is critical to that proliferation.
Absolutely. If a war breaks out and you lose half your satellites to a cyber attack or jamming, the winner of that conflict will be the nation that has the industrial capacity to launch replacements the fastest.
It is an industrial war of attrition, taking place at 17,000 miles per hour. All major powers have fundamentally recognized a new, undeniable doctrine. Space superiority equals strategic superiority.
You simply cannot win a modern war on Earth if you are losing the war in space. The logic of the Cold War arms race, the pursuit of deterrence, the rapid technological escalation, the constant maneuvering for advantage, has fully extended into orbit.
And this brings us back to you, the listener, and the chilling picture of how all of this high-level strategy translates into actual human experience.
Because the way we have been conditioned by movies and history books to think about the start of a world war is entirely outdated.
We think of alarm sirens wailing, massive troop mobilizations, tanks crossing physical borders, or missiles raining down on cities.
But the strategic consensus across all the intelligence we've reviewed is that the next great war will not begin with explosions on Earth. It will start with invisible attacks 500 kilometers above us.
The opening salvo will be entirely silent, fought with directed energy lasers, electronic jamming, and cyber intrusions in the frictionless vacuum of low Earth orbit.
The primary objective for any aggressor will be to blind the adversary, sever their communication links, and shatter their orbital kill chain before a single conventional weapon is fired.
The terrifying reality is that the first sign that World War III has started won't be breaking news on your television showing troops massing at a border. It will be much more subtle and much more disruptive to your immediate life.
It will be you looking at your phone and realizing the GPS map is frozen or putting you in the middle of the ocean.
It will be the sudden, inexplicable destabilization of internet routing, causing widespread outages. You will go to the grocery store to stock up on supplies, and the credit card terminals will be locked out because the banking apps are malfunctioning due to timing synchronization failures.
Global supply chain logistics will stall as ships and cargo planes lose their routing data. Traffic lights in major cities will desynchronize.
The opening salvo of the next global conflict will look exactly like a cascading wave of everyday technological chaos. You won't hear the war start. You will just feel the modern world suddenly stop working.
That is the ultimate vulnerability of the system we have built. We have interwoven the fabric of modern life with an infrastructure that is now actively targeted by the most advanced militaries in the world.
Which leaves us with a deeply concerning final thought to consider. We have spent decades, centuries even, obsessing over securing our borders on Earth, building walls, drawing lines on maps, deploying armies to protect physical terrestrial territory.
But in our relentless pursuit of technological convenience, rapid global communication, and instantaneous financial transactions, we have quietly offloaded the very foundations of modern civilization into a frictionless vacuum 500 kilometers away.
We have placed our most critical nervous system into an environment where there are no physical borders, where the rules of engagement are undefined and deeply ambiguous, and where there are absolutely no places to hide.
It is a profound realization.
Are we, in our drive for ultimate connectivity and military precision, inherently building a civilization that is just one technical anomaly, one misunderstood sensor reading, or one invisible orbital attack away from returning to the Dark Ages? It's something to think about the next time you use your phone to pay for a coffee.
That is the fragile reality of the silent front we now rely on.
Llegamos al final de este extenso análisis. Si les sumó valor, compartan y suscríbanse a Strategic Labs. Hasta la próxima.